Brought to you by Penguin.
The Hanged Man by Simon Kernick. Read by Paul Thornley. Prologue. Hugh Manning knew he was a marked man, but he'd planned for this day for a long, long time. 15 years ago, he'd thrown in his hat with the wrong people, and from that point forward, he'd been preparing for a way out. In the interim, he'd made a serious amount of money. Millions, most of which the taxman had never seen. Right now, though, sitting in the cramped spare bedroom of the cottage he'd bought through an offshore company 3 years earlier, he would have given up every penny just to be able to sleep properly at night. For the last 2 weeks, he and his wife had effectively been on the run. Diana had had an idea who he'd been working for, but even so, she'd still been shocked when he'd announced one morning that they had to leave their beloved Georgian townhouse in Bayswater forever, with just enough luggage to fit in the car. She hadn't liked it, of course. There'd been tears, anger, and recriminations. But Diana had enjoyed the money just as much as him, and anyway, there was nothing she could do about it. If she'd stayed behind, they'd have come for her, too. The plan had been to take a ferry from Felixstowe to Rotterdam, using the fake passports he possessed in his and Diana's names, buy a pair of airline tickets for cash in a bucket shop, then fly from Amsterdam's Schiphol airport to Panama City. Panama was a country neither of them had ever visited or even researched online, so no one would come looking for them there. Manning had watched a program on it once, though, and thought it looked a nice place to live. Even the healthcare system was world-class. They'd rent a property and settle in one of the quiet towns on the Pacific coast, living comfortably on the $2.2 million he kept in a numbered bank account in the Cayman Islands until they died peacefully of old age many years down the line. As plans went, it was thorough and well thought out, but then, like most good lawyers, Manning was a thorough man. Unfortunately, what looks great in theory can fall apart very quickly in practice, and when they'd arrived in Felixstowe, there'd been some sort of security alert going on. Diana had panicked, convinced that the alert was about them, and had refused to travel. In truth, Manning had panicked too, but he'd still blamed Diana for their hesitation. And now, instead of basking in the tropical sunshine of Central America, they were stuck out here in the featureless flatlands of rural Lincolnshire, waiting for the police to conclude that the two of them were dead or had fled the country, and lift the all-ports alert Manning was sure they had put in place. He was sitting at the window in the spare bedroom, from where he had a good vantage point over the rolling, treeless fields, watching for Diana's car. She'd left to go shopping for supplies in Horncastle, an hour's round trip at most, but she'd been gone close to an hour and a half, and he was beginning to get anxious. Diana had never been the ideal wife, and he certainly hadn't been the ideal husband. They'd lived in a state of mutual tolerance for years, and he knew she'd had at least one affair, which was about 10 fewer than him. And even now, years later, she still bitterly resented the fact he'd never given her children. But right now, she was the only person he had in the world, and he needed her. The cigarette in his hand was shaking, and he drew deeply on it, trying in vain to stay calm as he blew the smoke out of the open window. He was meant to smoke outside as Diana couldn't stand the smell of it, something she never tired of telling him. Just as she never tired of telling him how she couldn't understand why he'd taken up the cigarettes again at the age of 39 after 10 years without them. But then she hadn't known the full extent of the depravity of the men he'd been working for, or the things he'd seen. Cigarettes had been one way of coping with the stress of his work. The other was alcohol. He looked at his watch. 4:55 p.m. Where the hell was she? She was usually pretty efficient at the shop, being just as keen to avoid being out in public as he was. The problem was, he couldn't even phone her. Although they both carried unregistered mobile phones, the reception at the
Sample complete. Ready to continue?